Louise Le Blanc is a young girl from a big family with a vast magical background, and we meet her for the first time as she prepares to attend her second year of school at Tristein Magical Academy. The new teacher congratulates the students for making it to the second year, and to get things going, she requests Louise to come forth and demonstrate one of the most basic spells. Louise's classmates were not sure about her casting spells, as apparently, even though she came from a famous magician family, Louise's inability to cast a proper spell had earned her the name of Louise the Zero. Being the self-absorbed maid she is, Louise still tries it, and she causes the whole classroom to blow up. Louise's personality and inability had made her a joke in front of her peers, but even though others were laughing at her throughout school, she was quite confident in her summoning ability for some reason. On the following night, Louise is seen to be worried about the bold statement she made earlier, and when the summoning class comes on the next day, while other students successfully summon some cool monsters, Louise just ends up summoning a human named Saito Hiraga from Tokyo, Japan. Louise was disappointed with her blunder, but she had to follow the rules and form a contract with Saito. Saito wasn't able to understand Louise's language, and she knocks him out after a rune symbol appears on his hand. Saito wakes up back at Louise's place, where she tells him that he is supposedly just a slave. Since Saito wouldn't just shut up and listen either, Louise tries to cast a silent spell, but she messes up and instead gives Saito the ability to speak her language. Saito isn't able to fathom what's going on, so he tries to escape the place, but he soon realizes that this is a different world and not just a dream when he finds two moons in the night sky. A flashback takes us back to Japan and shows how Saito was just out wandering in the streets when he accidentally came across a weird portal that brought him to this world. The guy is brought back to Louise's room, where he is chained down this time. He tries to explain how he came from Earth, but Louise isn't able to understand, and she falls asleep after telling him that he is just a peasant who is supposed to do errands for her. The guy sleeps on the floor that night, and next morning, Louise takes him to have breakfast. Saito was rather excited about getting to eat such good food, but Louise brings him back to reality and makes him eat a piece of bread whilst on the floor. Saito isn't impressed by the arrogance of these nobles, and he continues to follow along with Louise, where he meets a maid named Siesta. The maid was the first person who acted kind towards Saito, so he was willing to volunteer to help her out with distributing stuff. Saito heads over to serve noble Gish, but seeing him with a different girl than last night piques Saito's interest and he spills the beans. Gish gets in some trouble as both girls find out about how he was cheating on them. Gish gets rejected by both of them at the same time, and the humiliation enrages him to the point where he challenges Saito to a duel. Despite being a peasant himself and Louise being against the idea, Saito accepts the challenge, and while the crowd is setting up, the teacher, Mr. Colbert, visits the headmaster to explain how he has suspicions of Saito being a legendary summon due to the rune on his hand. Back to the duel. Saito realizes that he made a mistake when Gish literally pulls out an armored golem, but he still sticks to his word, continuing to fight. The fight was so one-sided that now even Louise was telling Saito to quit, but he refuses to back down despite being wounded. Gish is impressed by this determination, and he gives Saito a sword. As soon as Saito lays hands on that sword, the rune symbol acts up and gives Saito some physical buffs alongside elite sword skills. With the newly awakened powers, anime logic comes hand in hand, and Saito steps in to completely dominate Gish's golem to the point that he had to accept a brutal defeat. Saito, even though was standing victorious, soon faints due to pushing his body way too far, and he later wakes up in a warm bed, completely patched up, courtesy of Louise. Due to the injuries, Saito had to bedridden for a good few days, and as soon as he recovers, Louise forces him to do all the laundry that had piled up by now. Saito is still being treated like a dog by Louise, but his last battle had earned him the interest of a noble named Kirsch. Later on, Saito attends class with Louise, where he comes to know about her name, Zero, and her inability to cast any spells. Naturally, Saito proceeds to make fun of Louise and her nickname Zero, but that kind of backfires as he makes Louise extremely furious. Louise makes sure that Saito skips a couple of meals as a punishment, and while trying to make up to her, Saito humiliates Louise further by mentioning her childlike physique. The guy is kicked out of the room by his master, and as he is freezing on the floor outside, Siesta finds him. She takes Saito to the kitchen where the staff give him the leftovers to eat, while mentioning how all of the commoners are impressed by Saito's last fight. Saito later talks with Siesta for a while outside, and he returns to the dorm where Kirsch catches him. Kirsch wanted Saito to be hers, and while other guys after Kirsch were extremely envious of Saito, Louise arrives to drag Saito back to her room. She beats Saito up for not following orders before sitting down to reason with him. The guy somehow manages to convince Louise of his innocence, and she lets him stay inside. On the next morning, Louise takes Saito to the town for sword shopping, and Kirsch follows the pair with her friend as well. Louise wanted to buy the most expensive sword, but Saito ended up with a weird rusty one as Louise didn't have enough funds to spare. Kirsch also buys Saito a sword, but as hers was more expensive, the ladies get into a fight and put Saito on the spot where the decision was left up to him. Saito wanted to keep both swords, but after Louise's turned out to be the talking sword Derflinger, Saito chooses it and makes Kirsch a little disappointed. Sometime later, a noble named Count Mott happens to visit the academy's headmaster for some discussions regarding the towns nearby, and on the same day, later on, while Saito was busy trying to figure out how to properly clean Louise's clothes, Siesta meets up with him. Siesta had taken quite a liking to Saito by now, and she generously washes the laundry for him while teaching him the ways. Saito also was happy about his interaction with Siesta. Saito continues to be bribed by Kirsch with the sword she bought him earlier, and that earns him some more punishment from Louise. On the next day, Saito was wandering around the school when the head chef found him and treated him to some more delicious food. While enjoying food, Saito comes to know about how Siesta had supposedly left her job as a kitchen maid. The guy confirms it with Louise, who tells them how Siesta was ordered to go along with Count Mott, as he wanted her as his mistress. Saito doesn't like how this sounds, so he heads over to Mott's place alone the next day. By the time the other girls get to know about this, Saito is already in an audience with Mott, where he tries to reason with him. Being a noble, Mott was pretty arrogant, and he almost punished Saito if it wasn't for Siesta begging him for mercy. Seeing Siesta beg, Mott agrees to let her go, but he demands Saito bring an heirloom that the Germania family have. This was a book belonging to Kirsch's family, so Saito tries to convince her, but the situation goes nowhere. As a last resort, Saito takes the sword Kirsch got him and heads on over to challenge Mott. The guards bring Saito over to Mott, but his powers do not work with this sword, as it was supposed to be just a fancy showpiece. Saito is in a bad place when the girls arrive to save him, and later Kirsch gifts Mott the book he wanted for sparing Saito and letting Siesta go. The book turns out to be a mere Japanese adult magazine, but it helps Saito in rescuing Siesta from Mott, earning him her respect and a kiss on the cheek. A few days pass after the event with Mott, and now the academy seems to be in a bit of a pinch as a masked mage is spotted, seeking the treasure in the academy's vault. The treasure wasn't the only thing in trouble, as we get to watch Saito while he's trying to learn some sort of new tricks for the upcoming exhibition. As Saito basically has nothing close to interesting, the situation becomes a headache for Louise, who wanted this dude to show at least some skill. Saito also isn't fully capable of showing some sword skills after the event with Mott, but Louise forces him to practice swordplay regardless. Saito was doing a strange dance in the name of sword training when Siesta comes up and tells him about how the stakes are really high for the exhibition due to the involvement of Princess Henrietta herself. All the contenders seem to be quite optimistic about giving it their all, and Siesta leaves to get her stuff done after wishing Saito good luck. Saito was seemingly enjoying the current treatment, while elsewhere, the teachers of the academy are seen to be worried about a mage known as Fouquet the Sculptor coming after Tristein Academy's treasure vault. On the next morning, Henrietta arrives at the academy for the event, and everyone greets her. Later on, Saito is joking around with Louise in her room while she's yelling at him to properly practice the sword when an unknown guest seems to pull up on them. The guest was Henrietta, and she gives Louise a tight hug, revealing how happy she is for meeting her childhood playmate once again. Henrietta also finds Saito quite an amusing character, and she leaves after having a brief conversation. The next day marks the start of the exhibition, and other students put on quite the show for the princess. As Louise's number comes close, she gets more and more nervous, and upon their turn, the whole crowd just laughs at Saito. Saito makes a fool out of himself when he argues with his sword Derflinger, or Del for short, and later on, the party is joined by the notorious Fouquet, who pulls up on her sand golem and gets hold of Saito. Louise stood up to her and tried to get Saito away, but as always, her inability to cast proper spells led her to hit the vaulted tower, exposing the treasure. Fouquet wastes no time, and she quickly makes a run for it after stealing what she came here for. Saito is saved by Tabitha and her dragon familiar, and the only real loss was the treasure. Henrietta later checks up on Louise and Saito when Louise seems to be greatly worried about her friend, as Henrietta would be getting in some serious trouble due to this heist. Even after the exhibition ended up in a mess, Saito was in class enjoying life quite a lot, while Louise was constantly getting bothered about the recoil that this heist would bring alongside. While Louise was busy ranting, Headmaster Osmond calls Louise, Kirsch, and Tabitha to his office, where he shows them a sketch of Fouquet, while his assistant, Longwell, briefly explains the situation. Apparently, with the current information, the Academy's officials had deduced that Fouquet was taking shelter in the nearby forest, as she was not seen leaving it at any of the check spots. Since sending a large group of troops would alert her, the plan was to send a group of a few mages, and while the headmaster was debating on it, Louise and the other girls volunteered to go. Longwell announces to guide the kids to the location, and they grab their stuff to look for the stolen staff of destruction. On the way, Longwell explains a little about how she lost her place as a former noble, and as the group reaches the location, they find nothing but an old shack. At first, the group assumes that it's just an empty shack, but they are shocked when they find the stolen box inside. At the same time, the group gets attacked by Fouquet's golem from earlier, and Louise gets herself in big trouble when her pride as a mage makes her try and fight the thing. Louise is not able to do anything in battle as usual, and Saito had to step in to save her. Saito sends Louise with the other girls, and he pulls out his fancy sword to try and fight the golem. When the fancy sword did absolutely nothing and broke into 2 pieces, Saito had to turn to Del, and his rune power did work this time, helping him out with cutting the golem's leg. The fight was still going nowhere as the golem could regenerate, so Louise stepped in again, and this time with the Staff of Destruction. As Louise is trying to figure out how this thing works, Saito realizes that the staff is just a rocket launcher, and he uses it to destroy the golem. Soon after the golem is destroyed, Longwell appears once again, and she introduces herself as Fouquet after getting her hands on a rocket launcher. Fouquet explains that this was a part of her plan to know how the Staff of Destruction works, but she makes a fool out of herself as obviously without ammo, a rocket launcher was of no use. Saito was aware of this, and he steps in to knock Fouquet out, impressing the girls big time. The kids report back to Osmond, and he announces about the 3 girls getting rewarded by the palace. Saito confronts the old man about the staff, and he reveals how he found it off of a guy from another world who saved them back in the day. The guy Osmond was talking about was an American soldier from Earth, but Osmond's big reveal destroys Saito's hopes of finding a way back to Earth. Saito, later on, attends a ball where he gets to dance with Louise. She treats him nicely this time and thanks him for helping her earlier. As capturing Fouquet was really important for the image of Princess Henrietta, our pair headed on over to personally explain the situation to her. Henrietta praises both of them for their excellent service and promises a reward of loyalty before asking the 2 for a favor. The pair is sent to a nearby village to live as commoners, as after the last event regarding Maud, Henrietta was not quite sure about how the nobles are treating the commoners around the area. As the favor was for the princess herself, Louise agrees to help her out without a second thought, but as soon as she reaches the village with Saito, things start to seem a bit rough. Louise was a noble and had never experienced anything but the most privileged of life. Louise's arrogance stops her from staying at anything less than a 5-star hotel, And since Henrietta only gave them so much funds, the pair roams around town throughout the day. By evening, Louise ends up blowing everything up at the casino, and while she is arguing with Saito again, a strange man named Skarin happens to find them. The man ran the Fairy Inn down the road, and he offers the pair a room to stay in if Louise works there as a maid. Saito was sent back to work in the dish pit, where his closeness with Skarin's daughter Jessica bothered Louise a lot. Around that time, Skarin announced a little competition to motivate the girls with a special dress as a prize. Louise was also interested in the dress, but her arrogance kept getting in the way of her serving the customers. Saito tries to help her out later on in the night, but Louise is unable to understand how Saito was not worrying about her status at all. The pair continued to work at the shop, and while Saito was having a great time with Jessica, Louise kept yelling at the customers for the most absurd things. Louise gets into an argument with Jessica for Saito later on, where she challenges Louise to win the competition. Louise was looking for the perfect customer afterward when a local noble happened to arrive with his guards. None of the maids wanted to serve such a horrible human, but Louise for some reason gives it a try without thinking. She ends up kicking the noble in the face, and he leaves after bribing Louise as she revealed her identity as a noble. The day ended with Louise winning the tournament, but since they had to leave the village now, she wears the special dress exclusively to get a compliment out of Saito. While the pair packs up to return to Tristein Academy, a strange man visits the cells to free Fouquet, implying a dangerous future awaiting Louise the Zero and her familiar. With no clear way back home for Saito yet found, and things getting more and more complex, our recap for today comes to an end. Thanks for sticking till the end, and let us know in the comments if you guys want a second part of this series. Don't forget to leave us a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, we'll see you in the next one. Peace.